Welcome, everybody, to Drum Education Live number 42. Today we have the amazing Rod Morgenstein with us. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And we're going to start with Kira's question. She always asks this question. Kira, your question, please.
So, my question is to do with drumming education. And I wondered if you think if there's anything missing from drumming education today.
Oh, interesting. I can't speak for every teacher that's out there around the world, of which there must be tens of thousands. That wouldn't be fair to say what's missing and then come to find out that most of them, except I, have not been teaching that. So my thing is, and I try to keep it in mind with everything that I put my name on, whether it is the teaching that I did for the 20 years commuting, the 250 miles back and forth to Boston, to Berklee College of Music, or the drum books that I've written, or the online course in rock drumming that I created for Berklee's online division. I always try to keep in mind that the drum set is a musical instrument and it should be taught as one. And so, like, for example, when Rick Mattingly and I wrote The Drum Set Musician, which we started, oh my goodness, must be 30 years ago. Rick was the original editor of Modern Drummer magazine, and he stayed there for at least a decade or so. And he's still very involved in the drum world. So when we talked about writing a book, obviously, when we started in the mid or late 80s, even that many years ago, there were thousands upon thousands of drum set books on the market. And so he, being someone who had reviewed hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of books, he said what was interesting to him is there are so many books out there, many of them great, but they seem to be books that are filled with either drum beats or drum fills, or how to comp the left hand when you're playing the jazz ride pattern. But he said there really didn't seem to be a tremendous number, or to him, there weren't really any to speak of, that teach the drum set as a musical instrument. And so by that, what he meant, and now what I mean, is obviously drumming is all about playing grooves and fills, but we took the approach of creating an introduction intermediate drum set, but called The Drum Set Musician, by instead of saying, okay, here's the first beat, here's the second beat, here's a fill. It's kind of like, okay, what do you do with a drum beat now that you have it? Well, we apply it to music. And so let's talk about song form. So probably the most basic song form is the 12-bar blues. And so then there's a little discussion of, well, what comprises the 12-bar blues? Well, you have three phrases that are made up of four measures, right? And that adds up to 4, 4, 4, 12. And normally when you start the first time through the 12 measures, you might crash the crash cymbal to designate the beginning of this new section or part of the song. And then at the end of the phrase, you might play a drum fill that leads into a cymbal crash that designates the beginning of the next phrase. So we kind of took that approach. So as we started with basic grooves consisting of quarter notes and eighth notes, we would then take that initial beat, whether it's pa, pa, and then I wrote a handful of pieces of music with a click track, and then there's a little chart. So now, in addition to learning beats and fills and learning song form, now you're learning how to read drum charts. And in the book, I mean, it's very methodical, starts very, very simple and basic. Not that simple and basic is stupid. That's something that took me about 25 years to realize and learn, because I was one of those kids that grew up with the Beatles and the Stones and Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix and all those amazing bands. And then I got into the progressive bands like ELP, Yes, which then logically took me into the jazz world and into the blossoming fusion music of the early 70s and mid 70s with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, Return to Forever, that whole world. And I was in college at that time, and I had become the proverbial music snob, where if you were able to figure it out on the first listen, it was stupid. Why would anybody write music or play the same drum beat that we've heard 1,000 times before when there's so much more to explore and learn? So really, for the first more than 10 years of my professional career, when I got out of college, and it started with the Dixie Dregs, which is my first band that met in college, right up until the time that I auditioned for the band Winger, I was a complete musical snob that thought rock music in general was dumb.
Confession time.
And the drumming was even dumber, because everything that I was hearing, I had heard before. I'm speaking generally, nothing is ever 100%. And so it took going through some interesting, I guess, humbling and sometimes humiliating experiences jamming with rock musicians who put me in my place, to kind of begin to turn me around and begin to appreciate not only the complex, really hard to figure out stuff, which I had been into for so long, but to also have this new appreciation for all things simple. And with the general thinking being, there's good and bad in everything. So there's really, really great complicated music, but there's really, really boring complicated music that just seems to be complex for the sake of being complex and having nothing to do with the musicality of it. But then the same thing is true for bands like AC/DC. To me, there's no greater rock song than Back in Black, and listen to the drum beat. It's what I call tried and true kick snare pattern number one. Bass drum on 1 and 3, snare on 2 and 4, eighth note ride pattern. And that's kind of how I began forming the 12-week course, Rock Drums, for Berklee's online division. Back in Black.
Cool. Yeah, this thing of if it's not complex, I don't want to know about. I'm guilty as everybody else, because the only reason I listened to Winger first was because you were the drummer. Otherwise, it was a time when I was obsessed with fusion, and I was dipping to Dixie Dregs and Billy Coben and all of these things. And then somebody told me about this new rock band Winger, and I was like, man, I don't want to hear rock, hair rock anymore, hair metal, know. And then I look at the sleeve that was your name, was like, is this for real?
Well, okay, so here's a really interesting story. Fortunately, I was having these humbling experiences with rock musicians that initially they were very excited to meet me and jam with me, because all of them, even if they were, more your straight ahead rock musician, they were into the Dixie Dregs. And so they would, the guitarist or bass player would start with a riff. I'd start playing, and for a measure or two or three or four, I would kind of play, a hard hitting basic rock groove. But then I would go off into the things that fusion drummers like to go off into, throwing in the polyrhythms, not defining the downbeat of the beginning of a phrase, playing over the bar line, doing all the fun things that I had been into doing for the previous 15, 20 years, since I was in high school, college, and then all those years with the Dixie Dregs and the Steve Morse Band. So I had this really interesting experience in meeting Kip Winger and Reb Beach I was in the offices of a Japanese management company on some other business. They managed the new age artist Kitaro, who was very big in the 80s, new age music. You don't even hear about new age music anymore. But so they needed a drummer for his upcoming theater tour of the United States. And I was basically out of work trying to find the next thing to do. And when I went to the offices of this management company, they said, "Oh, we feel terrible. I know last week we told you to come in here. Kitaro needs to put a band together, but he flew from Japan to LA and he chose all LA based musicians for the tour. So we're sorry." You might know the drummer who's doing the tour. His name is Casey Sherrill, who's this wonderful drummer. And he was a colleague of mine at Berkeley for the 20 years that I taught up there. I'm sure he's still there. And I jokingly have thanked him for the Winger gig, because had I done the Kitaro tour, which was like a month-long tour, I wouldn't have been around to audition for Winger. So anyway, when I was leaving the offices, I thought I was the only person there other than the man who ran this management company. But I heard some rock music coming from behind a closed door. And so, I kind of said to this man, "Oh, I didn't know there's anybody else here." And he said, "Oh, let me introduce you to these two guys. They keep trying to get a record deal. They keep getting rejected from every label in New York, but they're going for their third go around. And we're letting them use our 8-track Tascam recorder to do demos." Opens the door. This now I know what the song is that was playing. It was a demo of the song Madeleine, which was actually Winger's first single a year later. And it was Kip Winger and our lead guitarist, Reb Beach. And he said, "Hey guys, I just want to introduce you to Rod. He's a drummer, blah, 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 blah." And it was very funny because, Kip said, "Hey man, how's it going? I don't know who you are." But Reb Beach was freaking out because the Dixie Dregs were one of his favorite all-time bands, and Steve Morse was just about his favorite guitarist, right? And so Kip said, "Look at Reb, he's acting, look at him, so silly." And Reb's going, "You don't know who this is, and we're not worthy," and blah, 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 blah. Of course, I didn't tell them, I'm an unemployed musician looking for the next thing to do. I kind of had to act cool because Reb was so excited. So Kip said, "Look, we're getting ready to go for another go around with all the record labels. We're not going to stop until we get a record deal. And, every time a band in New York City needs a drummer, there's like 20, 30 regular guys that come to all the cattle call auditions. But look how excited Reb is. Do you want to just get together and jam next week?" So I said, "Sure." And so that's what happened. So the next week, Kip called me up, told me where to go. And when I showed up to the audition, I left my fusion chops out in the hall because I was so concerned with showing him that I could hit hard and play stupid. But I wasn't thinking stupid anymore at this point because I'd been having these experiences with rock drummers telling me, "Rod, you don't get it when it comes to rock. You have to respect these simple patterns that they're tried and true. They've been around since the beginning of rock and roll. They're not going anywhere. We keep hearing them on record after record." All right, so I walked into the room, got the drums set up, and then Kip walked over to me and he started pumping eighth notes on his bass. So I played the Back in Black beat with sloshy hi-hats. I didn't play a fill. I hit the drums as hard as I could. And he stopped me about 15 seconds into it and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "What do you mean, what am I doing? You're pumping eighth notes and I'm playing what I think is appropriate." He went, yeah, it's great, it's great. But Reb told me you could do all this crazy stuff. I said, "I'm intentionally not doing that because I don't want to scare you away." And that's what I've been doing for the last umpteen years. But like, I'm really looking forward to kind of transitioning, I kind of back to my roots. And he said, okay, look, I want you to lose me now. Just do all your crazy stuff. I said, are you sure? And he went, yeah. All right. So now for the next few minutes, I just started like doing all the fun things like you guys know, right? And I couldn't lose him. And he said, that's awesome. I said, I'm just curious, like why you're having me do this. And he said, well, every band that's being signed these days are, you know, like the hair bands, right? So you have Bon Jovi and Cinderella, Kiss, Poison, Motley Crue, just keep going down the list. If you looked at the Billboard charts back then, they dominated the top 20, 30. I mean, you had Garth Brooks and Michael Jackson in there. So he said, we're looking for ways that we can be a little bit different than those bands that I just mentioned. So we have to have a lot that's similar to what these bands do. But he said, not that I'm going to be asking you to play like you're playing the Dixie Dregs all the time, but there might be occasion where, you know, we give you the signal and we want you to do things that people in rock never hear, because rock drummers don't do that. And most rock drummers don't know how to do that kind of stuff. I said, wow, okay. So, you know, several months later, he called me up and said, hey, we got a record deal. We're on Atlantic Records. Would you like to cut the album? I said, sure. So in January of 1988, we began cutting the first Winger album, and several songs into it, we were doing the song 17, and I cut the drums from start to finish. And then the producer came onto the talkback and he said, hey, Rod, that sounded fine, but I want you to do another take of the song. And after Reb's guitar solo, there are 4 measures of a riff. I said, oh yeah. Do something in those 4 measures that a rock drummer doesn't know how to do, or that you would never, ever hear in rock. I said, okay, I have an idea. I don't know if you guys are going to like it, but let's do it. All right, so when that section came up, I played the first 2 measures, but then in measures 3 and 4, I displaced that beat by an 8th note. So instead of going 1 on the bass drum, I went 1. And then instead of hitting the snare on 2, I went 2. So it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So it's like taking what I call tried and true kick snare pattern number 3 and displacing it by an 8th note, starting it 1/8 note later. So, you know, you have that's all, 2 measures. So when I looked up and through, you know, the double panes of glass into the studio room, all the heads disappeared. They had all fallen on the floor and were laughing in hysterics. That's what ended up being on the album. And the really exciting part to the story is, well, for one, the video of 17 was one of the most played videos, beginning around October or November of 88 into 89. And it pushed our album past the 1 million sales mark in the United States and gold all over the world. And what was so exciting for me was when we were out on the road playing the song and meeting fans. So many of the musician fans would come up to me. They'd never heard of me because they didn't know who the Dixie Dregs are. You know, if you said, oh, you know, fusion musician, they knew Neil Peart. Basically, that was it, right? So they would say, what's going on after the guitar solo in 17, what time signature is that? Why does the bottom drop out? Why does it sound like the music turns upside down? It's so disorienting, but cool. Right? So I would explain, well, this is really entry level groove displacement. And then I would rattle off a lot of my contemporaries' names. I'd say, when you listen to Simon Phillips or Billy Cobham, Steve Smith, Vinnie Colaiuta, Dave Weckl, blah, blah, blah. And, I'm telling you, I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of fans, and they'd go, who? Because
Wow.
I was in a completely different world now. I was
Yeah.
not in the Dixie Dregs fusion world. It was just the world of rock and roll. And so it was very flattering that so many people were picking up on this unusual thing that they had never heard before. And so it's like the perfect illustration of going back to my audition when Kip said, because we want a drummer who could do things that rock drummers don't do. And we will periodically want you to throw in those kinds of things into the music so that when people are talking about us, when they say, yeah, Def Leppard and Poison, they'll look at us a little bit differently. And so I just said Poison. In 2002, we did an outdoor, they call them sheds, the outdoor venues across the United States with Poison and Cinderella and another band from that time called Faster Pussycat. And the guitarist in Poison, CC DeVille, who's really this sweet guy. He's out of his mind. He's crazy. He's always bouncing off the walls, but he would always, come by our room and pop his head in, or come in and go, oh, here's the fusion band on our tour. For us is the fusion band. Actually, some months before we were on that tour, I was in California at the NAMM show, the trade show, the music trade show.
Yeah.
And I ran into CC DeVille, and I went up to him to introduce myself, to say, hey, see you in a few months. We're doing the tour with you. And he goes, I know who you are, Dixie Dregs. And he starts spinning around in circles like he's playing. And he talks like that. But he was saying, I grew up in a family of musicians. My mom is a classical violinist and played, I forget what symphony he told me, but he said, and so I was very serious on the guitar. And he's mimicking it, holding it up here. And then he said, and then I realized if I want to be famous, I have to drop the guitar about 3 feet so it's held really low. And then he started spinning around again. And so it was great. He was totally not quite what I was expecting.
I would like to go back to the period between actually Steve Morse band and Winger, because I remember reading an interview we did with Modern Drummer many years ago, and then you said you were in New York and people didn't know who you are, never heard of the Dixie Dregs, and I was like, that's crazy. How come people have never heard of you guys? I would like to ask you about your frame of mind at that point, because you were like in this band that revolutionized fusion, bringing country music into fusion. You're being recognized as one of these great drummers in the fusion thing, and then you all of a sudden you're having all these humbling experiences where people are saying, "Nah, we don't want you." So how do you feel? I'm trying to find something that could help other musicians who might go through the same thing.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate that I was brought up in the most stable family with the most wonderful parents. I lost both of my parents last year.
Oh, sorry to hear about
They
that.
were 97.
Wow.
And they never missed a concert that I played. They've seen me perform 150 times
Wow.
through the years. And just as a quick aside, I have to tell the story.
Of course.
It really illustrates it. So my dad was in and out of the hospital 15 times over the course of 3 months.
Wow.
Shortly before he died. And so I would pick him up to take him home. every time he was released. And one time when I came to pick him up, I was sitting with him in the hospital room, and the attendant with the wheelchair came in to wheel my dad downstairs. And he walked in, I said, hi. And he said, hi, Rod. You don't remember me, do you? And I said, ooh, refresh my memory. He said, well, remember when you were here in the emergency 5 years ago with kidney stones? And of course I remember. It was the most painful experience of my life. It ended up being 20 days long,
Wow.
5 of the days in a hospital in Utah. That's a whole other story. But so this man, when 5 years earlier came in with a wheelchair to take me for an MRI or a CAT scan, came in the room, I'm high as a kite on morphine, right? And he looks at me, he goes, you're not a drummer, are you? And I said, yeah, you don't play the Dixie Dregs, do you? You know the Dixie Dregs. Okay, so he's freaking out. You're my favorite band in the world. I've seen you play every single time you performed on Long Island since 1976. I'm a guitarist. Steve Morse is my favorite guitarist, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so now it's 5 years later. He's in the room. He reminds me, refreshes my memory. And so I say, oh, it's so nice to see you. This is my dad. And so the guy looks at me and says, you're joking, right? I go, what? He said, well, I've seen the Dixie Dregs every time you've performed in New York, including the reunion tour that you did in 2018. Correct me if I'm wrong. Your parents were also at that show, stage left, ground level. I said, yes, they were. He said, Rod, your parents have been at every single show that you've ever performed up here, as have I. And I hate to break the news to you, but your parents are as famous as the musicians in the Dixie Dregs. Right. So it was such a beautiful moment. My dad is hooting and hollering. It was wonderful. So, you know, going back to my parents and my upbringing, you know, they were the ones that instilled in my sister and I, or my sister and me, I think, that they're both educators. We were the people that would read the menus in restaurants to look for the typos. So, you know, but they instilled in us, you can be anything you want to be. And so when our family sat around the television on a Sunday night in February of 1964, and the Beatles performed on the Ed Sullivan Show for the first time, I immediately identified with it and said, that's what I want to be when I grow up. And my parents were totally supportive from that day forward till their last day on earth. And, you know, so when you grow up with that kind of support system where you have a nice feeling about who you are, and I mean, it's not to say that when the Dixie Dregs and the Steve Morse Band ended, I didn't have my self-doubts about, oh my God, I'm a loser. Is my career over? Will the next thing come? But I had moved back to New York, and my wife and I were living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. And she stayed in Atlanta for a while for me to just go to New York City, pound the pavement, see what I could muster up, you know? But so I think upbringing has something to do with it. But for people that don't grow up in like those kind of situations or grow up in less than perfect situations, the thing is, I know it's just words, but to kind of have some faith in yourself, believe in yourself. If you think you're pretty good at what you do, odds are you are pretty good at what you do. And the thing in music and the arts in general, unfortunately, is to understand that, you know, so much of it is hit and miss, and a chance meeting, a lucky break. Of course, I mean, there's a saying, luck favors the prepared. You always want to be on your A game so that when that life-changing moment presents itself, you're ready to show who you are. But I guess somewhere inside me, I always felt like, you know, if you can let time or the passage of time be your friend, instead of think life is over, I'll never amount to anything from this day forward, just, you know, give it a shot, look at what you've accomplished up to this point, and um, hope for that lucky break or that door to open. And it's going to happen when you least expect it. But just make sure that you're prepared for it when it does happen.
I guess you know, you weren't expecting to join a band like Winger, and weren't you prepared as a drummer who could bring the fusion world to what they wanted? You wouldn't have had the chance either.
That's true. Yeah, very true. I mean, Kip was looking for something specific. So probably most of those drummers that were on his list of 25, 30 drummers um, were rock drummers. And I experienced that because when I got to New York City, I was established so that I was able to find out about the cattle calls going on. And so in the course of my first year living there, I auditioned for Joe Lynn Turner, George Michael, Patti Smythe and Scandal, Billy Idol, and I'm probably leaving some out. I didn't get any of them. In fact, the Joe Lynn Turner audition, and Joe Lynn Turner, he sang with, I think, Deep Purple.
Yeah,
So,
Deep Purple and Rainbow
very,
as well.
very successful rock singer. My audition was set up through a mutual friend, Larry Mazer, who at the time was the manager of the band Cinderella. And Larry had been managing the Steve Morse band prior to managing Cinderella. So when I moved to New York, I called him and said, Larry, help, help, help. So I said, I have you an audition. I set up an audition for you with Joe Lynn Turner. So just go to New Jersey on this day, blah, blah, blah. I went and did the audition, and Larry called me a couple of days later, said, Rod, what happened? I said, I went, I did the audition. He goes, I know you did the audition. Joe told me you're the worst drummer he's ever heard in his life. Yeah. So, I mean, it didn't sit too well with me. You know, I mean, I wasn't in a great frame of mind, like I told you, when I first moved up there. You're questioning who you are. And it didn't matter that I already had 3 or 4 Grammy nominations from the last 4 Dixie Dregs albums. And I think, you know, that year I was like maybe up and coming drummer or something in modern drummer. It didn't matter. None of that matters when you're looking for a gig.
I cannot imagine anyone saying that.
Yeah,
about you.
Hey, it happened. It really did happen. I mean, you know, the funny end to the story was, you know, right around when, I don't know, the Winger record went gold or platinum, I was at a Halloween party at a mutual friend's house where Joe Lynn Turner was at the party. And so now here I was now in the band selling nearly 2 million albums, and he wasn't, you know. So he came over to me and just said, touche.
Oh, nice.
It was very nice.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Kira.
It must have been, I have a separate question, but I guess it must have been really like affirming and just feel so great that, you know, you thought you had to be like a certain kind of drummer and just lay it down. And then he was like, come on, do the thing that is you. I just think that's magical, really. That
well,
you know.
To me, the best part of my career has been having the opportunity for and the challenge to wear many different hats, right? So you have the Dixie Dregs and Winger that are obviously 2 very, very different things, you know. But in addition to that, I've through the years played in a band called Jazz is Dead. It's a play on words. It's a band that jams to the music of the Grateful Dead, and it's jazz, you know, jazz musicians doing their take on the Dead's music. And when I joined the band, I replaced the original drummer, who was Billy Cobham, who was one of my idols growing up. So it was kind of a terrifying slot to fill. Actually, there were 2 drummers. It was me and another amazing drummer by the name of Jeff Sipe, S-I-P-E. And so I would do some of the touring, then he did some of the touring, and then we decided to do a summer of double drumming, where he taught. Jeff at the time was into all the Indian takatimi, all that kind of stuff, and we worked out a drum solo doing that. But what was also really scary was flying to the first Jazz is Dead show, knowing that I was playing with the bass player Alfonso Johnson, who was someone that I used to go see, you know, in my younger years. I saw him with Weather Report and the Billy Cobham George Duke band. I remember when I saw the Cobham Duke band standing in the audience, watching Alfonso play, and just having the thought, what would it be like to play with somebody like him or him? And so then fast forward, 25 years, there I was in a band with him.
Amazing.
And the thing that was so special about Jazz is Dead, that's completely different than anything that I've ever done, is the jam band philosophy is make it up as you go along. And however you did it last night, don't do it the same way tonight. Every other band that I play in, you know, you rehearse and rehearse and rehearse to come up with the perfect parts that you're kind of going to stick to with little bits of embellishment, because with drumming, you do have a fair amount of freedom. But in Jazz is Dead, you don't do the same songs night to night. And if something completely different hits you, you go with it. And the band doesn't look at you with these nasty looks, nasty faces. They look at you kind of, yeah, cool. I like where you're taking it. And a song could be 20 minutes long.
And
the audience is, you know, just doing their spinning and twirling.
Is it kind of not scary but worrying that one night you might not be able to be as free as you would like in a situation like that?
No, that the whole idea of it is it's okay to fall on your face.
Okay.
Go for it. Really stretch your limits of what you're capable of. And if you fail, that's okay too. Look, that's the mindset of the audience. They don't want to hear the same thing night to night. And
that's
I think,
so
if you speak to anybody that plays in a jam band, I would imagine they'll say something similar to what I'm saying. But then in addition to those bands, I have this really cool duo with Jordan Rudess, who's the keyboard player in Dream Theater. Before Jordan was in Dream Theater, he was the world's best kept keyboardist secret. You know, we had him in the Dixie Dregs for a short period of time. And then, the first gig he did with us in the Dixie Dregs, the very first gig, and this is after only one day of rehearsing. So he only knew us all 24 hours. So we're on stage. We're in the middle of our first concert in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And simultaneously, the guitar, bass, and violin rigs lost power. Everything stopped, and our crew frantically went into action to try to fix things. And I looked over at this guy who I had just met the day before, whose keyboards were not in an amp, they were directly into the PA. So they were still in the PA system, as were my drums. So we just kept playing and playing and playing and playing as a duo. And it truly was magical. And then maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes into it, everybody's rigs were fixed and we went back into our concert. But after the concert, Jordan and I talked about how amazing it was and how powerful it sounded just with the two of us playing. And that was the kind of, the match that lit the fire for us to do a record together. And we call ourselves the Rod Morgenstein Project. And, both of us are so busy in our other worlds. I've done his last 2 or 3 solo records, or at least, a lot of, on a couple of them, all the drumming. And on his recent one, I think I did half of the album and 2 other guys, Marco Miniman, and is it Elijah Wood who plays drums? I think maybe he plays drums on one song. But Jordan's a really close friend. It's so sad that we don't get to see each other very much. We try and talk every couple of months, and whenever possible, we do concerts.
Cool.
And then on top of that, then I have this really cool trio with Ty Tabor, who's the guitarist in King's X, and John Myung, who's the bass player in Dream Theater. And we call ourselves the Jelly Jam. And that music is kind of like, it's vocal oriented, power pop with a little prog thrown in music. And so, going back to your question or statement that you made a few minutes ago, the best part of my music career has been existing in these completely different worlds, and then trying to, on the one hand, be true to the music. So I don't want someone to listen to the Rod Morgenstein project and say, why is a jazz drummer playing this crazy, prog music? I want someone to go, wow, I love the drumming in this music. It's so authentic. But then there are these surprises that are always happening in it that I don't normally hear, like a prog drummer do.
Yeah.
Or in Jazz Is Dead, it's not really what you would hear Bill Kreutzmann or Mickey Hart in the Grateful Dead doing. Or in Winger, I've never heard, this weird drumming. I don't even know what you call it. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
It is the best part, as opposed to being in one band for a 50-year career, which, I mean, in and of itself is amazing. It means you've not had to kind of, struggle to find the next thing.
But one of the albums we recorded that actually blew my mind is Kip Winger's solo album, This Conversation Seems Like a Dream, because that is completely different from what I knew you did, because I knew what you did with the Dixie Dregs, then Steve Morse Band, then Winger, and then his solo album is completely different, and your drumming is something like superb. And I was like, how can he play like that too?
Oh, thank you. I put Kip Winger in the same category as Steve Morse and Jordan Rudess. It is so tragic that, when the fall of the hair bands happened, that Kip Winger was the face of all things to make fun of and tear down. You cannot imagine what our band, but mostly Kip, went through when everything was destroyed, because he was made fun of everywhere as this talentless, like the good-looking, talentless hack. And so, just to set the record straight, last year, Kip's first classical album was up for a Grammy for Best Classical Album. He's on the Grammy committee that listens to new classical music. He's written music for a ballet that is part of the San Francisco Ballet Company's repertoire. They do it every year. I saw it when it premiered in San Francisco several years ago, and then not that long ago at Lincoln Center in New York City when the San Francisco Ballet Company performed it. And they've also performed it in the Paris Opera House. And so Kip Winger, is the real deal. He's also, for the last 4 or 5 years, been writing music for what hopefully will become a Broadway musical called Get Jack. It's a musical based on the life of Jack the Ripper as sung through the mouths of his victims.
Wow.
And so he was contacted by someone in that Broadway music world who wrote the story, and he got involved with him. And so they're making headway. So hopefully one day it'll make it there. But, it's funny. We started having Winger Zoom meetings. So a couple of days ago, we had our second. We're doing it every week now.
Cool.
Forward. We have a plan for the first time, really, since our heyday, to become a full-time band again, and really hit it hard for as long as everybody's physically capable. The hardest part is the vocals, because back when Kip was in his 20s, he was not thinking about how difficult it might be to sing a high C or whatever, or F, when he's, you know, in his 50s. As you know, most rock singers, they don't have the range that they had when they were younger, with the exception of Joe Lynn Turner, who we unfortunately lost, and Mickey Thomas, the singer from Starship, and I don't know who else can still
I don't.
pump it
Yeah,
out.
maybe no.
Fire
Yeah.
instruments. Yeah.
So I know Kira has a question about the Rudess Morgenstein duo.
Oh yeah. So it started off you guys just jamming because you're on stage and you have to, but I understand that you're really good at piano yourself. So I wanted to know how involved you are in what you perform together. I know a lot of it is improvised, but was there a point where you collaborated together and wrote together, or did you leave that to him?
Right. So Jordan, that concert took place in the fall of 1994. And Jordan played with us for, I don't know, it was October and November, something like that, of 94. And then towards the end of the year, he told me he won Best New Talent in Keyboard Magazine. And at the NAMM show in 1995, they are putting on a concert. Keyboard Magazine is putting on a concert one of the evenings with as many of their contest winners as they can get to the NAMM show. And he asked me, do you want to do one of my songs, one of his songs, in the concert? And so that was my introduction into learning how the mind of Jordan Rudess works. I cursed him for the 5 or 10 hours it took me to make sense of his 5 or 6 minute song. Took that long for me to learn it.
Wow.
Because his music is filled with 3s and 2s. You know, it's like 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2. It's insane. But I've come to like see how his mind works, so it's not nearly as difficult anymore. And so after we did that concert in January of 95, we said, you know what? We need to do an album. And so shortly thereafter, we started getting together at his house, because he lives maybe an hour and a half from me. And over the course of the next year and a half, we recorded 10 songs. 4 of them were his, 4 were mine, and we wrote 2 together.
Cool.
And we cut the drums at Kip Winger's studio in, at the time, Kip was living out in New Mexico. What's the town? It's an hour north of Albuquerque. Why would you guys
Sorry,
know?
I don't know.
It's on the tip of my tongue. It's a beautiful, beautiful town. Yeah, and so that album, the Rudess Morgenstein Project album, came out in the fall of 97. In fact, wait, I'm just going to walk my laptop over to the wall to show you the artwork of the album cover. There it is.
Yeah.
And so that it was done by a friend of mine, airbrushed a portrait of me and Jordan.
Cool.
And so I don't know if Jordan knows I still have it, because he'd probably say, hey, can I have that?
I have a question about your instructional video, putting it all together, which changed my life and the life of all the people I know my age, who play drums and they are my age. Why isn't it out at the Hudson app, please?
Oh, it's not available anymore?
No, it's not. I've never seen it coming to DVD. Actually, I only saw it on as VHS.
You know what? I've not spoken to anybody there in years. You know, it came out in 1987. I had just did it come out in 87 or 88? I had just maybe joined Winger. So this is pre-Winger when it was cut.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was cut in 86. Maybe it came out in 88. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that.
Okay.
They feel it's too dated because it's so old.
No, it's an amazing video. It's like everybody who's in their 50s now or thereabouts, and I talk about you, they go like, Yeah, that instructional video is the best one ever. Is the best one ever.
No
So
kidding. Thank you. You know what? Maybe I said this earlier. Um, Anything that I put my name on, I really go, you know, to the end of the earth to make sure that every moment of it is how it needs to be. Right? You ever, read even a best-selling book, and by the time you get to the end of it, you're going to find 2 or 3 typos. You just find them. I won't allow that to happen in anything that I do. I mean, fortunately, like I made the joke before, me and my parents go out to restaurant and we read the menus looking for typos. So I proof and reproof until I know there are no mistakes.
and I think that video is kind of the seed of the musical drummer, the book, because it basically showed me how to play, because I was the guy who, I knew a bunch of drum beats, but if I needed, I was very good at playing music that already existed. But if somebody came to me and said, "Okay, now, you know, come up with the drum part," it was really hard for me. And then after watching that video, it was like, you know,
Oh, interesting.
revelation time.
Yeah. I have to tell a quick story of a nightmare
Okay.
scenario. So, um, this rock drums course, this online, it's a college course that you could take for 3 credits, or if you don't want to take it for credits, it's a little cheaper as far as what it cost. Um, it took me the better part of a year to create, and I was sort of logging the hours, and it took about 1,500 hours
Wow.
because it's a multimedia undertaking, right? You're not only writing like a 200-page book, but you're cutting 10 or more hours of video that you have to script the entire thing, and then I made a point of illustrating every concept, idea, approach that's in the 12-week course by finding the perfect drumming musical example, by listening to 10,000 pieces of music, and then finding the 300 perfect ones, and then having to edit the 1, 2, 4, 8 measures, then transcribe them all, and then have everything pieced together and create music for the course, blah, 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 blah. So my book, The Drum Set Musician, and the Drum Set Warm-Ups book, they're both part of the course.
Okay.
So 6 or 7 years into the course, the people at Hal Leonard, who are the publishers of the Drum Set Musician, came to me and Rick Mattingly and said, "Hey, we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary of the book, and it continues to do really, really well. Would you guys consider doing a second edition, like a redo of the book? Add some pages to it, take out the things that you don't think are necessary anymore." So we spent the better part of a year doing this. So now the book went from a 70 or 70 whatever page book to an 80 something page book. I got my copy of it. I was so proud. Yay, another achievement. I woke up in the middle of the night some days later in like a cold sweat. I was having a nightmare because the realization of the fact that the book, which is used in the course, not everything is going to correspond anymore. When I'm in a video saying, "Okay, on page 45, example 7B," is no longer page 45, and it might not be example 7B anymore. I kind of went into a panic. I had to sit with the book and comb through the course from the very beginning to the very end, and found like 100 places where things were no longer corresponding with the second edition.
Oh man.
That's a nightmare.
And so now, when someone takes the course, someone just commented to me yesterday, because there's a 1-hour hang that we do where whoever in the world is available when I say we're doing it each week. So it's the 5th week of the 12 weeks. And I kind of told this story to them yesterday, and And they said, yeah, this is the first week where when you said whatever, below it, it said when at 1 minute and 37 seconds, when Rod says page data in the, it is now page blah, blah, blah. So, oh my goodness. Really was a horror story until it was done.
I bet.
Because, you know, we're not going to recut 10 or 15 hours of videos.
Yeah, of course.
Just to have me say something, you know, get the right page.
Cool. All right. So I like to put pressure on Kira. So Kira, it's the time for your last question. So make it good.
Oh no. Okay. I heard that Billy Cobham is a huge influence for you, and you had to open for his band.
Ah.
How the heck did you deal with that? Were you not nervous? How did you not think about that? You know.
I am so glad you brought this up, because I actually have an item that I'm going to show you guys.
Cool.
Yeah, this was, I believe, 1978. Our second album, the Dixie Dregs' second album, had come out, and we got the opening slot for the Billy Cobham Band at the Roxy on Sunset Strip in LA. Terrifying is an understatement, right? But on top of that, what happened was, the Roxy is a small club. It seats maybe, packed to capacity, 500 people. When you go out on stage, there's a curtain, so you can't see the audience. And the front row, they're tables. It's not a row of seats. There's a table that has 2, 3, 4 chairs around it, then a table, 2, 3, 4 chairs. You start playing after they announce your name, and then the curtain raises. It's very dramatic. So as the curtain is raising, the 5 of us in the band are looking across the front row at Stanley Clarke, Jaco Pastorius, Lenny White, Michael Walden, John McLaughlin, and others. And someone told us, I don't know if it was true, that that Jeff Beck or Joni Mitchell was somewhere in the back. You talk about, the granddaddy of the fusion music, John McLaughlin, you know, the Mahavishnu Orchestra. There they were. And it was almost like a rite of passage. These are all the people that we were listening to for the previous 5 years. That's all we listened to. It's all I listened to. And after our set, we got to meet all of these people, and they were saying the nicest things to us. It was
Wow.
one of the life-changing moments in my career, for sure, of my entire life. And so then Billy's band came out, and he had Randy Jackson playing bass, remember, from American Idol?
Yeah.
Randy Jackson was a bass player. I thought John Schofield was the guitarist. I could be wrong. But for his encore, he brought all those people up on stage. So you're looking at not just Randy Jackson, but Jaco Pastorius, the guy who changed the electric bass with the fretless, Stanley Clarke, Michael Walden, and Lenny White are up there. Now, one of them was playing a tambourine in the jam. And I guess he was hitting it so hard, it cracked in half. And one piece of it, the piece he wasn't holding, flew off the stage, and I lunged for it.
Wow.
This is my memory from that show.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
How did you not be nervous though? How did you not let it get in your head? Were you just like, we've got to do this, we're in like power mode? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, there's definitely pins and needles, and I can experience this happening. Like your body is kind of shaking. You're a wreck, But once you get started and you're maybe a minute into it and you're talking to yourself going, hey, you know, this is not a bad experience. This is one of the most wonderful things you're ever going to experience in your life. And you want the people who are listening to you, you know, to think as highly of you as possible. So how's that going to happen? Oh, that's right. Kind of settle down. This is the moment you've been preparing for your whole life. It's okay to be a little nervous, but you know, as the show went on and we started feeling a little bit more comfortable, you settle in eventually. But at first, no, you're a wreck. You can't help it. And you know what? Same thing with drum clinics. I've probably done, I don't know, 200 some odd drum clinics in my life. Every time, right before I go out on stage, I'm pacing backstage, you know, while whoever's talking, going blah, 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 and then please welcome. It's like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Because it, you know, with a clinic, it's just you.
Yeah.
You're not hiding behind your bandmates, you know, and a massive PA system. It's just you. Hey, everybody, how's it going? And same thing with that. With clinics, it always takes, you know, a few minutes of sitting down and playing a little bit. But I always would start clinics playing along to a track as opposed to just an unaccompanied solo, because playing along with the track kind of, at least for me, helps settle me down and get me a little bit loosened up.
Yeah, I watched the clinic you did at Guitar Center back in the 90s when I was living in LA, and yeah, I couldn't tell you were nervous.
Yeah, well, you know, that's the whole thing in showbiz. You don't want to show that you're nervous, but inside you're human like the next person. What I discovered early on in doing clinics is that the audience is just as nervous as you are. All you have to do is scan the crowd and make eye contact. And as soon as you look at someone, they look down. They're afraid that you might call on them. But, you know, before I did clinics, I went to clinics to kind of learn what to do and what not to do. I learned a lot from going to see other people do them. And
Cool.
yeah, and I discovered, like, at least for me, the thing not to do is to go out and play a 30-minute drum solo. People aren't coming to a drum clinic to just be blown away by somebody and then feel like, what's the point in even playing my instrument anymore? I'll never be able to do that. But also, to me, the clinic should be a nicely prepared, well-rounded experience where it involves a little playing to tracks, a little unaccompanied, just drum soloing, anecdotal stories, humor, taking questions, and not answering the person who asked the question by just looking at that person, because there's an audience of 50 or 100 or 1,000 other people. And so, like, I've seen so many people that would just get into it with the person in the front row, sometimes not even with a microphone, you know. Repeat the question that's asked. Try to make sure that everybody is involved the entire time.
Cool. Yeah. Nice.
And there's an art to doing it.
It is. Rod, thank you very much for your time. It was amazing and
a lot of fun.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. It was amazing. Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.